Welcome to the Amphibian Press podcast. I'm V.S. Holmes, and with me today is YA fantasy author R.A. Lewis. And she's the author of the Voldeer Chronicles, and I'll just give you a quick glimpse of the first in that series. The Dragon Riders disappeared the year she was born. Kalina is a nobody, an orphan whose only remarkable trait is the silver hair she is forced to hide. But when she overhears that she might be a child of the Voldeer, a silver-haired race of dragon riders that disappeared 16 years ago, she chooses to leave her old life behind and venture into the unknown to discover who she is and where the dragons disappeared to. But someone has been searching for her. In a strange city, searching for answers to her past, Kalina must conquer her own fear, deal with dangers she never anticipated from a crown she never knew existed, and forge friendships with unlikely people to help her find her place in the world. Born of Air is the first book in the Voldeer Chronicles. If you loved Aragon, you will love this coming-of-age adventure, and it's available on Amazon.com. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
And thank you also for your flexibility with our little technical snafu that I was joking about online earlier. So
It happens to the best of us, honestly.
yes.
It's all good.
Tell me a little bit about the inspiration behind Born of Air and the rest of the Voldeer Chronicles.
Well, it all started when I was in a writing group with some friends, and I was kind of in between projects, and I couldn't figure out what the heck I wanted to write. And I turned to my friend and I said, okay, I want you to give me, a fantasy writing prompt. And so she came back and she was like, all right, I want you to write a short story about a virgin obsessed wyvern. And I was like, all right. Okay. So I started writing and I was like, well, virgin obsessed wyvern's a little weird. So, I ended up modifying a little bit. But next thing I knew, I was, 10,000 words deep into this story, and I had three books planned out.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, okay, guess this
Well
isn't
then.
going to be just a short story. And then for NaNoWriMo a few years later, or a few months later, a few years ago, I wrote the first in the series. And I mean, really, I just love telling stories about people, mainly females, mainly women, finding their place kind of in the world, and finding their power. I think is important for me personally. I think I grew up without a lot of power and without feeling like I knew who I was or where I belonged. And I think that that's part of why, like, young adult novels in particular call to me the most, and
Right.
why that kind of storyline means so much to me as an author. And so that was kind of the motivation behind this, was writing a character who didn't really have her place in the world. She didn't really know who she was. She's just kind of a sheltered orphan. And then writing this story of her, discovering who she is and where she belongs, and finding her family and finding her origins, and really coming into that finding out that she's powerful, that she's not helpless, that she's, not some small thing, that she's in fact capable of so much. And that's really what this entire series is about.
I was talking with another YA author somewhat recently on the podcast, and we were discussing how YA is read at least equally. I'm not sure of the stats myself, but at least equally by adults as it is by young adults, and why that is. And I think so many of us, we're sort of told that myth that, like, oh, when you grow up, you'll understand, you'll you'll have some sense
Yeah.
of how to do things. And we get to adulthood and realize, like, oh, so, like, no one actually knows what the heck we're doing.
What we're doing.
It's just it's just a farce. And
yeah.
I think a lot of us then still want those stories because it does take a long time. I mean, I think it takes all of our lives really to figure out who we are and our own power. And it's inspiring to read that, even if it is, like a 16-year-old figuring it out, because really the process is the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the two defining things about YA is the age of the characters and
Hmm.
the journey that they go through. And the
Right.
journey is always a journey of self-discovery, and the
Hmm.
characters are usually in their teens. I
Right.
mean, I've seen characters up into their early 20s in YA, but I think that, there's that balance between YA and NA, um,
Right. Which
new adult.
still
But
isn't a genre apparently, according to to some
yeah, they're
publishers.
still figuring that out. But
Mhm.
there's, I mean, some of my biggest fans actually are older ladies in their
Mhm.
60s, and I have no idea why. I couldn't tell you
Right.
why they love my book so much. But then again, when I was growing up, my mother would always ask me, like, well, when are you going to read real books? I
Mm.
just kind of look at her and be like, what do you mean by real books?
Oh
And
my god.
she meant, when are you going to read not YA? When are you going to read not fantasy? She wanted me to read, fiction books with her, fiction novels with her. And I just be like,
Mhm.
Mom, that's not my thing. And now I'm in my 30s and I write those books. And guess what? My mother reads them and she loves them. And I'm like,
Well, that's
see,
good.
you see what you've been missing for all these years?
Mhm. Oh my gosh.
So, I mean,
My mom's the same way, and I mean, she hasn't quite come around yet, but she pretty much only reads anything that has hit the mainstream bestseller lists or has won, like,
oh, yeah.
and,
Hmm. That's mine
it's
too.
and, like, that's fine, I'm sure those books are wonderful too, but I remember
Hmm.
her,
They are.
like,
Yeah.
saying something about, like, "Well, maybe I might try and read, like, more trashy fiction, not award winners," and I'm like, "There's there's a lot going on in that statement, mom." And she's
Right?
starting to now,
So much
but
judgment.
I know, right? Well, she worked in publishing for years on the magazine side of things, so I think part of it comes from that,
Oh,
and,
yeah.
it's but it's so funny to talk to her because 'cause I'll mention these stories that I'm reading, and she's like, "Oh, that sounds really interesting, like, who are they?" And then
Yeah.
I'll tell her who the author is, and she's like, "Well, have they won awards?" And I'm like, "No, that's why you haven't heard of them yet." But at least, I mean,
Yeah.
at least she's reading and she's still learning a lot too, which is fun. But so tell me
Yeah.
a little bit about your other series because you also have the Elemental Kingdom series, which I think sounds really really interesting. So tell me a little bit about that.
So this is obviously, I mean, I don't want to say obviously, but when you're a writer, every time you have a new project, you just get really excited about it.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I'm in the middle of writing the Elemental Kingdom series. And so of course, like, I'm super stoked about it. The first book came out in March of this year, and the second book I literally finished writing last night at 11 o'clock.
Oh my God!
So
Congratulations. That's so
thank
exciting.
you. So that one is coming out in on June 26th.
Oh,
And
good.
then I'm diving right into the third one. There's going to be 4 books in this series. And then there's going to be a companion series, and I have so many plans. Um, but basically, this story is, again, it's another coming of age story, but it centers on these two twin protagonists, who a boy and a girl who have elemental powers. The girl is what I call a wind dancer, and the boy is a fire walker. So they have kind of not directly opposing powers, but they have different powers, which is
Right.
strange for twins in this world. And they were born into a country that has magical slavery.
Mm-hmm.
where people with magic, uh, magic is very commonplace, but it's not the majority of the population. The majority of the population either has are what I call thin bloods, which means they just kind of have a drop of magic, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's the rest of the population, which is bloodless. They don't have any magical blood in them, and so those of the blood, those who have the magic, are in this country are enslaved and conscripted into an army.
Okay.
Um, and basically, these two main characters are separated as small children. Uh, the boy gets taken by a slaver
Mm-hmm.
and raised as a slave, away from his family, away from his sister. And then our story starts with him escaping that slavery and finding his way back to his family. And it just sort of is about, again, self-discovery, because that's what YA is about. Um, but it's about finding your power. It's about um, that what is family, what defines family for people, because it's different for everybody, and it doesn't always mean blood relations. And yet sometimes you're just kind of stuck with the people you're related to, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Most of us, yes.
Yeah. And then it also kind of, I touch on subjects of mental health, of trauma, because I mean, being
Mm-hmm.
raised as a slave, imagine what that does to a person, you know. And
Right.
I touch on addiction. I touch on a couple different issues throughout this story, but and then the second book follows those same two twins, but then a third character. So the story is essentially an ensemble cast, and first book's told from two perspectives, second book is told from three perspectives, the third book is going to be told from four perspectives, and the fourth book is going to be told probably from five perspectives. So,
That's cool.
but all of these lives are intertwined,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all part of one big long, like adventure together. And I think it's been very interesting to write twin main characters who were
Mm-hmm.
raised apart and are very different people. That has been really, I mean, that's been an adventure for me.
Now, I assume you're not a twin yourself, or
No,
no? Okay.
no. But that concept of family, and
Right.
who's your family, and finding your family, and just kind of all of that is important to me, because I am adopted,
Okay.
and have been on this journey for the last few years of finding my birth family, and kind of redefining what my adoptive family means to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that whole thing. So there's definitely a reason for me going down that path with
Yeah.
this book or with these books.
I find that
So
really interesting because I write mostly only children, and I myself am an only child, and
mm,
I noticed I was having a conversation with someone about who has many siblings, and I noticed that most of her characters have either at least one sibling or multiple siblings, and
yeah,
the only character I've written that has a sibling, you know, the two of them were separated at birth, um, or at
uh-huh,
least when she was born because she's younger, and didn't grew up not knowing of each other, and I think it goes back to that like deep-seated hope that somehow I'd find like this sibling that my parents didn't know I had, which is completely
uh-huh,
illogical.
yeah,
After watching things like The Parent Trap and whatnot, I was like, well, but maybe though, and it's really
right,
interesting how even though it's not necessarily logical, you seek out these roots even if you do have them, even if you know
Yep.
of your roots for the most part. Because my
Yeah.
parents were married and stayed married and everything, so it wasn't like there was someone in the woodwork there. And
Yeah.
I well, I think those themes really work with YA, but also when you're trying to find out who you are, I think sometimes it's easiest to start with, well,
Who's your family?
who did I come from? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting because I do have siblings. I have two of them, but
Hmm.
my older sibling, um I spent most of my life apart from him. And
Hmm.
he's adopted. He's my adopted sibling.
Right.
But we only grew up the very early part of our childhood together, and then I grew up as a single child from basically age 10 on.
Hmm.
And uh and then I have another sibling. I have a younger sister, but she's 22 years younger than me.
Oh wow.
So she's essentially a stranger to me in the sense that like I'm a full grown adult. I
Right.
don't, I never spent any time at home with her. I never grew up with her.
Hmm.
And so I think that when you mention that you write siblings, like uh that they don't have siblings or they have long lost siblings,
Hmm.
in the Valdir Chronicles, my character doesn't have any siblings. And
Right.
in my very first book, Secrets and Swords, my character doesn't have any siblings. I mostly write characters without siblings, and this was my very first foray into what it's like to have a sibling. And it's funny because I'm writing two siblings that did not grow up together, and they're coming back together and being like, wait, we're related. Not only are we related, we're twins. What?
Right.
And now they have to kind of figure out what the heck that means, and
Hmm.
what it means to them, and like, is this really family? Because I barely
Right.
know you, but yet you're it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, especially because there's a huge push for found families, I think, in a lot of fiction
Yeah,
now, and
yeah.
which it's something that I love because I feel like most of my sort of found family, it's friends that I've made, and I'll call people,
Yep.
like, oh well, my sister, oh my brother, but they're not by blood or anything like that. And I think it's neat to sort
Hmm.
of explore the other side of that, which is like, okay, family that you don't really have this connection to at all. It sort of
Yep.
turns it on its head for sure.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons actually why I started the Elemental Kingdom series, was because I love ensemble casts.
Hmm.
And because a lot of times with ensemble casts, you have that element of like, this is my chosen family. These are the people that I never want to be parted from, and they're not related to me, you know?
Right.
And that's something that it's not to sound too much like a millennial, but you find your tribe.
Yeah.
And that's and that's what it is. You're finding your tribe, you're finding your people, the ones that make you feel like you really belong.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. So you obviously have these themes of family and mental illness, trauma, and sort
Hmm.
of the human experience throughout your two series. But how are they different? Because obviously, elemental magic is often a little different from more like dragon magic and whatnot. So did you use completely different magic systems between the two series, or are they similar?
They're very different. The Valdir Chronicles is almost what I would call kind of lower fantasy. There are dragons, so that's obviously
Hmm.
a very high fantasy thing. But there's no real magic. I do talk
Okay.
about something in the books called the deep magic, which is
Hmm.
really just like the magic that runs through the earth. It's more of an energy. It's not.
Like mana.
Yeah, exactly. It's not specifically supernatural. It's not
Gotcha.
this, crazy thing that people can manipulate and use. It just is.
Hmm.
Um, but otherwise, there's no other magic in that series beyond the dragons.
Mhm.
them existing and them being, sentient beings. Um, but and then the Elemental Kingdoms series is, I mean, their entire world is built around the fact that people have magic. There are
Mhm.
certain cities where, they have advanced technology because of the magic. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I mean, it they're different. They're definitely
Yeah.
different.
That's
And
funny.
it's been fun to write the two.
I bet. My fantasy series is sort of a lower fantasy as well. I mean,
Mhm.
there's like gods and the creatures that created them, and these phenomenal cosmic powers, but very few
Mhm.
people have magic. Like it's pretty much, unless
Yeah.
if you are non-human, you don't have
Oh,
magic.
yeah.
And I've been sort of itching to write um a series, or at least a book with all of the magic, because I didn't do that
Yes.
before. And like,
Yeah.
just sort of no holds barred kind of thing. And
Yeah.
and I'm like, one of my super secret projects that I haven't really talked about much is definitely dabbling
But
in
you're
that.
gonna
So
tell us about it now.
yes, yes. But yeah, that's really fun. I think it's really good to be able to kind of stretch your creative legs that way, um,
Mhm.
because I mean, maybe all genres, but I think especially fantasy and sci-fi and more speculative genres, they have such a huge range of things you can do with them. And
Yeah.
whether you want it large scope, small scope, and it really lends itself to like kind of getting in the sandbox and throwing stuff around.
Yeah. That's been something that's interesting actually, between since I have mostly written lower fantasy
Hmm.
pretty much throughout my entire writing career. This is the first time that I've really delved into, a magic system, and oh my gosh, so much world building. But uh since I started this, book one was very magic heavy, mainly
Hmm.
because my characters end up going to a university where they teach you how to use your magic.
Oh, okay.
And so there's a lot of, you're learning the principles of magic along with the characters. Like, the characters are pretty, yeah, they have magic, but do they know anything about it other than the fact that they have it? No, because they haven't been trained.
Right.
And so you're, as the reader, you're learning along with them, which is kind of fun. But then I
Hmm.
wrote the second book in the series, and I get like halfway through, I'm like, oh wait, literally there's only been twice that people have used magic in the first 40,000 words. Uh-oh.
Oh dear. Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, book two has way less magic. And it wasn't like a conscious, like, yeah, we're just not going to use magic. I think
Hmm.
that like desire to write the lower fantasy just kind of came out a little bit.
Yeah.
So in the editing phase, I'm going to go back and I'm going to add in some scenes where magic is necessary, because it's cool. I have a pretty
Yeah.
cool, unique magic system that's based on blood.
Hmm.
And that's why I called them of the blood, because they have the blood,
Right.
they have magical blood. And so it's kind of a blood and elemental magic combination, and it's kind of fun. So I'm definitely gonna have to add some more in. And but it's been an adventure to write something with so much magic.
Hmm. It's funny you find yourself not writing these magic scenes, because my husband didn't read or watch Harry Potter ever, and we've been going through the
It's a
movies.
travesty.
I know.
It's so
Well,
good.
it's kind of wonderful because we're watching them together now, and he's really like engaged and enjoying a lot of it because it's new to him. But there's definitely scenes where
Uh-huh.
he's like, "Use your wand. Why are you using your wand?" And I feel
Right,
like
right.
your characters are doing the same thing. Like, why are you letting us use our magic? Come on.
Well, I have my developmental editors are doing the same thing. They're like messaging me, and they're like, "Wait, they're in this situation. Why don't they just do this?" And I'm like, "Oh, dang it. Okay, I have to come up with a reason why they can't, because if they do, that ruins the whole scene." So now I got to
Mhm.
go back and like build in some sort of reason why they can't just like do X, Y, and Z to use their magic to get out of the situation. It's like I'm sitting here like, no, the whole point is I'm stacking the odds against my characters. I'm making it harder. So if they have magic that they can just get out of any situation, then that defeats the whole purpose.
That's hard too, though, because like I've had to go back and I have like all these little notes when I think of them about like, oh crap, you hinted at this thing or this artifact or this map
Hmm.
or this person knows this thing, and
Yep.
it's like, and that never you never did anything with that, and people are going to wonder
Right.
why.
That's the beauty of developmental edits is people can go
Right.
back through your stuff and be like, wait a second, because as the author, I have everything in my head. I have
Hmm.
every detail. And so sometimes when I'm rereading my work, I don't catch those things because the
Right.
details are in my head. And so my brain kind of fills in the blank. If there's a plot
Hmm.
hole, my brain's like, oh, yeah, that's because of this. And the reader's like, what? So that's why
Come again? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So that's why I love my developmental editors because they can just be like, no, this doesn't make any sense. You have to add in, X, Y, and Z for this to make sense.
Yeah, thank goodness for editors and beta readers and
Seriously.
just other people keeping us in line.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we started the podcast, you and I were talking a little bit about audiobooks and just reading in general. What have you been reading lately that you've really enjoyed?
Wait, I have to tell this is exciting.
Okay.
Born of Air is getting an audiobook and it's currently in production.
Yay! That's so
I'm
exciting.
so excited.
I'm in the exact same boat because I've been listening to the audio proof of Smoke and Rain, which is the first in my fantasy series, and
Oh yeah.
it is so incredible to listen to someone else tell you your own story. But it's very different. Yeah.
Yeah, it's completely different. If I read my own stuff, like this is gonna sound really terrible. I get bored of my own stuff
Yeah,
because I know the story
you
already.
know the story. Yeah. Well, and you know the inflection, right?
But when you hear somebody bring it up, like,
Yeah.
yeah, and now somebody else is bringing your entire story to life, and oh my gosh, like,
And the accents.
it's completely different. So, what was the question again?
No. What books have you been reading or listening to lately that you've really enjoyed? Give us some recommendations.
I am currently super obsessed with Jay Kristoff's Nevernight series, and
Oh,
I'm
I've heard of that.
I'm
Yeah.
kind of slowly plotting through the second book, and part of it is because, like you and I were talking about before, like I don't have time
Hmm.
to really dedicate a lot of time to reading or even audiobooks. So audiobooks are just something that I do when I'm like in the car driving home from work. And so it's taking me a really long time. It's taking me, I think, 3 months to get through the second book in the series. But it is so well written. So
Well,
well
that's
written. It's beautiful. There's a lot of, I mean, it's not really YA friendly if the reader is under 18,
gotcha.
but it's great for anybody else who reads YA and doesn't mind quite a lot of cussing and a little bit of sex and a
Hmm.
lot of blood. And I kind of love
All good things.
all of
All good
those
things.
things. So yeah. So
I definitely enjoy slower burns when it comes to world building and also just like
mhm.
narrative stuff. I like to slowly ease into the world and discover it and all of its intricacies, sort of at my own pace. And
Mhm.
and I definitely like I can't remember the title of the book now, but there was a book that it took me like 2 years to read, and it wasn't because it was
Yeah.
like poorly written or anything. It was just like I needed to really sit with the world because it was a very subtle sort of portal
Yes.
fantasy book, and yeah, it's just I like that.
I mean, yeah, and that is kind of a little bit what I'm doing, and it's been great because the way that the Nevernight series is written is with a ton of footnotes
Oh, okay, yeah.
that Jay Kristoff has put in there, and I think that when you're reading the book, you get a little bit distracted by these footnotes. They kind of pull you out of the story. But
Mhm.
in the Audible version, the footnotes are kind of seamlessly just put in there. And the narration style, because the narrator of the book itself, not the Audible narrator, but the perspective from which the book
Right.
is written from kind of like the narrator themselves is their own character.
Okay.
And so they will address the audience kind of separate from the story, and that's a lot of what the footnotes are doing. And
Okay.
it's definitely a lot more seamless with the Audible version, just because you're not pulled out of the story every time you read a footnote. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Like the
Yeah,
the
yeah.
the narrator who reads the book definitely makes it just kind of flow really well.
Mhm.
And then yeah, it is such he did an unbelievable amount of world building on this story. Like I would akin it to uh you know Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings in terms of world
Mhm.
building, depth. How much he's thought through every tiny aspect of this world. And I mean, it's like it's a combination of your favorite, super high intricate fantasy like those,
Mhm.
mixed with the fast paced and the discover yourself storylines of a YA fantasy. It's this really interesting mix of kind of the two. And I am thoroughly enjoying it.
Well, that's good. I'll have to add that to my 20 book Goodreads goal for this year.
Yes, yes.
So you mentioned the next book in the Elemental Kingdom series is coming out June 26th. That my the last in my fantasy series comes out the day afterwards. So
Oh my gosh.
it's gonna be a good weekend.
Yes.
So what else is next for you?
I mean, the audiobooks honestly is
Hmm.
so basically by the end of 2020, I plan to have all four books in the Elemental Kingdom series published.
Hmm.
Um and I plan to have um all four of the Voldeer Chronicles published, because there's the three main novels and then there's a little novella about Kalina's parents. Um,
Okay.
and so I plan to have all of those published on audiobook,
Nice.
and that's the goal.
Well, that I
And
mean
then
that's a large goal.
it is, and I'm a little bit overwhelmed. But the good news about the audiobooks is that you know I do work. I do I'm not recording, I'm not editing,
Right.
that's
Hmm.
somebody else's job.
Right.
So my job really is just going to be marketing and trying to, find my audience. Um,
Hmm.
I get a little bit of a break until those come out, and I have to hustle. um,
Yeah.
and so I'm not super overwhelmed yet by the audiobook part, because
Mhm.
it's still in production. I have a little time.
The most overwhelming part is, unless you're working with a much larger publisher, you're helping choose or choosing the narrator, and
Yes,
that was the most
we do everything.
overwhelming part for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because I mean, there's you think like, oh well, as long as they have this sort of tone or this, accent or whatever, it'll be fine. And then you get like 40 auditions and they all have that tone and that accent. And you're like, well, crap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of options to wade through, but it
Hmm.
was it was fun. It was really
Yeah.
fun. Stressful, but
Hmm.
really fun.
I had a really fun sort of experience because I had about I think 44, 45 auditions to go through, and I very quickly weeded several out, and
Yeah.
then I had like my top six or top seven or whatever, and this was over like a month because at the time we were working, and I had a lot of other stuff I was dealing with. I had a book launch going on, and so a lot of additions kept coming in when I wasn't paying attention. And
Mhm.
I finally was like
Yeah.
probably a day away from like, okay, I think I've narrowed it down. This is the guy. And then this one last narration
Yeah.
squeaked in at the very end. And I just, within the first 3 seconds, I'm like, oh, never mind. Here he is. I
Perfect.
found him.
Yep. Yep.
And I've just been so lucky. But it is such like, it's way worse than trying to find a cover designer, I think, because trying to find someone who sounds like your character
Yes.
is harder
Yeah.
for some reason.
It's completely different because I mean, when you're trying to pick a cover designer, they you look at their covers and they instantly pop out at you. You know, like
Right.
you just know based on a 2 second like assessment whether or not you even like their style, you
Hmm.
know, or whether they're yeah, whether they have the skills
Hmm.
to do what you want. That's a really fast, quick thing, and you can weed out a lot of designers really fast that way.
Hmm.
I mean, you still have to be like, oh no, now which one of my top five do I pick? But
Right.
but it's still, you can weed out a lot of that really fast. But when it comes to audiobooks, yeah, you have to, you'll, like you said, you get 10 people who sound like your character or who
Hmm.
sound close enough to what your
Right.
character needs to sound like. And then you have to be like, okay, but which one is just right? Which one has
Hmm.
just the perfect amount of, you know, whatever skill, pitch, intonation, uh, variability, like whatever it is that you're looking for. Who can voice all the characters, you know, in a believable way? Who, yeah, it's just
Yeah.
there's a lot more. It's a lot more in depth of a process to choose a narrator than it is to choose a designer.
Well, I think also like with cover design, what you get on your cover is just a very quick snapshot of a scene. If,
Hmm.
if it's an actual scene from your book, if it's not like a
Yeah,
stylized illustration or whatever. And
yeah.
with
Or symbols, because I tend to
right,
go crazy with
well,
symbols.
exactly, yeah, and so unless if it's a symbol is simple, if it's just this little snapshot, it's fine. But you have to get someone who fits the entire mood of your whole book and how it changes,
Yeah.
as opposed to just this one cataclysmic battle or this one inspiring sigil or whatever. So where can people find you?
Obviously, all my books are on Amazon, and
Hmm.
they're all on Kindle Unlimited as well.
Okay.
And you can find me mostly on Facebook. I think that's, that kind of tells you how old I am.
Hmm.
Um, definitely, in the mid of the pack for millennials.
It's okay, me too.
And then Instagram. I mean, I'm on Goodreads and BookBub and stuff like that. But
Right.
I've got my Facebook page for Aria Lewis, but I also have a private fan group as well, and I love to be able to interact with my fans. And like I post snippets, and I'll post stuff there first before I post it anywhere else.
Hmm.
They get kind of that sneak peek earlier than everybody else of like my book covers and whatever else is going on. um and I am also on Patreon as well,
Oh yeah.
and have some fun goodies on there.
I love the idea of Patreon, but I've had a hard time figuring out how to leverage it as an author, partially because I'm a
Yeah.
really slow writer. So
Hmm.
I don't have
Yeah.
those little snippets or whatever. But
A friend of mine was on there, and she was like, I really think that you would enjoy this. I think that it would help not just up your readership, but also kind of help fund stuff. That's the whole point, is
hmm.
as when you're a Patreon patron, you pay me to give you an inside look. I give things to my Patreon people more than anybody else.
Hmm.
They get to actually participate in helping me write my novel. They'll help me pick character names. They'll help me, pick the next book that I'm going to read. They'll help me um, name things. Like I have a rebellion in my Elemental Kingdom series, and they helped me name it.
That's cool.
You know, and um, they get to see short stories and chapters that nobody else gets to see.
Hmm.
Um, they get, if depending on the tier that you're on, they'll get blog posts that I don't post anywhere else.
That's
Or
cool.
they will get photos that I don't post anywhere else. Or if you were in the higher tiers, then you would get to be a character in one of my books. Like
Yes.
I
I
try to give cool stuff.
yeah. I did that when I have launches, and now it's just for my ARC readers. But I would give away like a chance to get written in as a character. And in my
That's a cool
fantasy
idea.
series,
Yeah.
the character Hylier was an old friend from high school, and he
Uh-huh.
happened to be like a fantasy fan, so he ended up winning that, and it was so much
Nice.
fun. Like it was just like a quick interview, um,
Yeah.
but his character ended up being really interesting and sort of integral to some of the subplots, which was fun. So I have um,
Yeah.
I have sometimes my characters will read books. If like in my sci-fi series, which is set in this world, the characters will read books by my author friends, and
Mhm.
that's kind of a
That's
fun
great.
fun homage too. So
Yeah, exactly. It's fun to put little, I guess you'd call them Easter eggs in there.
right, yeah. But thank you so much for joining me again.
Yeah, no, it's been fun. I think that it's interesting because I don't remember all the details of our last interview, but I remember enough of them, and I feel like this interview went a different direction, and that's not a bad thing at
It did.
all. It's just interesting how it like. I almost feel like this one is a little bit more lighthearted. I think last time we focused a lot on the mental health stuff.
That's what we lost in the
Yeah,
audio
yeah,
recording. And so I listened to the
yeah,
first half. I'm like, okay, well, those are like the really basic questions that I know I'll be able to remember to ask again. And
yeah,
um, so I just figured, like, you know what, we're just going to throw everything out. We're going to dive in
yeah.
differently.
And
But
I think it works because right now I think about like when we did that interview, it was before the pandemic.
right,
And
right.
and right now, as much as obviously mental health is important in the middle of a pandemic, I also think that um maybe being a little bit more lighthearted
Hmm.
is
Yeah, for sure.
is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I had a lot of really big, like serious, heavy hitting interviews, like in January and December. And part of
Mhm.
that was because my dad died in October, so like I was asking these really deep questions, and
Yeah.
because that's like where I was,
Yeah.
and then, like not in like a necessarily depressing way, but just like heavy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now it's like I can't anymore with that right now. Like, there's too much of
Yeah.
it around.
Just too much.
Yeah,
Exactly. No, I'm happy to talk about
yeah,
the lighthearted, about audiobooks and what we're reading. I'm happy to do all of that. That's what I need. That's what
yes.
my soul needs right
Well, good.
now.
So thanks again for joining me, and I'll definitely have to both check out your books and your book recommendations. So this has been the Amphibian Press podcast. I'm VS Holmes, and with me today was R.A. Lewis. Thank you so much for listening.